sorcerer, reality, or the world we all know is only a description that's been pounded into us from the moment we were born. The reality of our day-to-day life, then, consists of an endless flow of perceptual interpretations which we have learned to make in common. I'm teaching you how to see as opposed to merely looking, and stopping the world is the first step to seeing. The sorcerer's description of the world is perceivable, but our insistence on holding on to our standard version of reality renders us almost deaf and blind to it. When you begin this teaching, there is another reality. That is to say, there is a sorcery description of the world, which you do not know. As a sorcerer and a teacher, I am teaching you that description. What I am doing with you consists, therefore, in setting up that unknown reality by unfolding its description, adding increasingly more complex parts as you go along. In order to arrive at seeing, one first has to stop the world. Stopping the world is indeed an appropriate rendition of certain states of awareness, in which the reality of everyday life is altered because the flow of interpretation, which ordinarily runs uninterruptedly, has been stopped by a set of circumstances alien to that flow. In this case, the set of circumstances alien to our normal flow of interpretations is the sorcery description of the world. The precondition for stopping the world is that one has to be convinced. In other words, one has to learn the new description in a total sense for the purpose of pitting it against the old one, and in that way break the dogmatic certainty which we all share that the validity of our perceptions, or our reality of the world, is not to be questioned. After stopping the world, the next step is seeing. By that, I mean what could be categorized as responding to the perceptual solicitations of a world outside the description we have learned to call reality. A man goes to knowledge as he goes to war, wide awake, with fear, with respect, and with absolute assurance. Going to knowledge or going to war in any other manner is a mistake, and whoever makes it will live to regret his steps. When a man has fulfilled those four requisites, there are no mistakes for which he will have to account. Under such conditions, his acts lose the blundering quality of a fool's acts. If such a man fails or suffers a defeat, he will have lost only a battle, and there will be no pitiful regrets over that. A man of knowledge is one who has followed truthfully the hardships of learning, a man who has, without rushing or without faltering, gone as far as he can in unraveling the secrets of power and knowledge. To become a man of knowledge, one must challenge and defeat his four natural enemies. When a man starts to learn, he is never clear about his objectives. His purpose is faulty. His intent is vague. He hopes for rewards that will never materialize, for he knows nothing of the hardships of learning. He slowly begins to learn, bit by bit at first, then in big chunks, and his thoughts soon clash. What he learns is never what he pictured or imagined, and so he begins to be afraid. Learning is never what one expects. Every step of learning is a new task, and the fear the man is experiencing begins to mount mercilessly, unyieldingly. His purpose becomes a battlefield, and thus he has stumbled upon the first of his natural enemies, fear. A terrible enemy, treacherous and difficult to overcome. It remains concealed at every turn of the way, prowling, waiting. And if the man, terrified in its presence, runs away, his enemy will have put an end to his quest, and he will never learn. He will never become a man of knowledge. He will perhaps be a bully or a harmless, scared man. At any rate, he will be a defeated man. His first enemy will have put an end to his cravings. It is not possible for a man to abandon himself to fear for years, then finally conquer it. If he gives in to fear, he will never conquer it, because he will shy away from learning and never try again. But if he tries to learn for years in the midst of his fear, he will eventually conquer it, because he will never have really abandoned himself to it. Therefore, he must not run away. He must defy his fear, and in spite of it, he must take the next step in learning, and the next, and the next. He must be fully afraid, and yet he must not stop. That is the rule. And the moment will come when his first enemy retreats. The man begins to feel sure of himself. His intent becomes stronger. Learning is no longer a terrifying task. When this joyful moment comes, the man can say without hesitation that he has defeated his first natural enemy. It happens little by little, and yet the fear is vanquished suddenly and fast. Once a man has vanquished fear, he is free from it for the rest of his life, because instead of fear, he has acquired clarity. A clarity of mind which erases fear. By then a man knows his desires. He knows how to satisfy those desires. He can anticipate the new steps of learning, and a sharp clarity surrounds everything. The man feels that nothing is concealed, and thus he has encountered his second enemy, clarity. That clarity of mind which is so hard to obtain dispels fear, but also blinds. It forces the man never to doubt himself. It gives him the assurance he can do anything he pleases, for he sees clearly into everything, and he is courageous because he is clear. And he stops at nothing because he is clear. But all that is a mistake. It is like something incomplete. If the man yields to this make-believe power, he has succumbed to his second enemy and will be patient when he should rush, and he will fumble with learning until he winds up incapable of learning anything more. His second enemy has just stopped him cold from trying to become a man of knowledge. Instead, the man may turn into a buoyant warrior or a clown, yet the clarity for which he has paid so dearly will never change to darkness and fear again. He will be clear as long as he lives, but he will no longer learn or yearn for anything. He must do what he did with fear. He must defy his clarity and use it only to see, and wait patiently and measure carefully before taking new steps. He must think above all that his clarity is almost a mistake, and a moment will come when he will understand that his clarity was only a point before his eyes, and thus he will have overcome his second enemy and will arrive at a position where nothing can harm him anymore. This will not be a mistake. It will not be only a point before his eyes. It will be true power. He will know at this point that the power he has been pursuing for so long is finally his. He can do with it whatever he pleases. His ally is at his command. His wish is the rule. He sees all that is around him, but he also has come across his third enemy, power. Power is the strongest of all enemies, and naturally, the easiest thing to do is to give in. After all, the man is truly invincible. He commands. He begins by taking calculated risks and ends in making rules because he is a master. A man at this stage hardly notices his third enemy closing in on him, and suddenly, without knowing, he will certainly have lost the battle. His enemy will have turned him into a cruel, capricious man, but he will never lose his clarity or his power. A man who is defeated by power dies without really knowing how to handle it. Power is only a burden upon his fate. Such a man has no command over himself, and cannot tell when or how to use his power. Once one of these enemies overpowers a man, there is nothing he can do. It is not possible, for instance, that a man who is defeated by power may see his error and mend his ways. Once a man gives in, he is through. If, however, he is temporarily blinded by power and then refuses it, his battle is still on. That means he is still trying to become a man of knowledge. A man is defeated only when he no longer tries and abandons himself. He has to come to realize that the power he has seemingly conquered is in reality never his. He must keep himself in line at all times, handling carefully and faithfully all that he has learned. If he can see that clarity and power without his control over himself are worse than mistakes, he will reach a point where everything is held in check. He will know then when and how to use his power, and thus he will have defeated his third enemy. The man will be by then at the end of his journey of learning, and almost without warning, he will come upon the last of his enemies, old age. This enemy is the cruelest of all, the one he won't be able to defeat completely, but only fight away. This is the time when a man has no more fears, no more impatient clarity of mind, a time when all his power is in check, but also the time when he has an unyielding desire to rest. If he gives in totally to his desire to lie down and forget, if he soothes himself in tiredness, he will have lost his last round, and his enemy will cut him down into a feeble old creature. His desire to retreat will overrule all his clarity, his power, and his knowledge. But if the man sloughs off his tiredness and lives his fate through, he can then be called a man of knowledge, if only for the brief moment when he succeeds in fighting off his last invincible enemy. That moment of clarity, power, and knowledge is enough. Anything is one of a million paths. Therefore, you must always keep in mind that a path is only a path. If you feel you should not follow it, you must not stay with it under any conditions. To have such clarity, you must lead a disciplined life. Only then will you know that any path is only a path, and there is no affront to oneself or to others in dropping it, if that is what your heart tells you to do. But your desire to keep on the path or to leave it must be free of fear or ambition. I warn you, look at every path closely and deliberately. Try it as many times as you think necessary. This question is one that only a very old man asks. Does this path have a heart? All paths are the same. They lead nowhere. They are paths going through the bush or into the bush. In my own life, I could say I have traversed long, long paths, but I am not anywhere. Does this path have a heart? If it does, the path is good. If it doesn't, it is of no use. Both paths lead nowhere, but one has a heart. The other doesn't. One makes for a joyful journey. As long as you follow it, you are one with it. The other will make you curse your life. One makes you strong. The other weakens you. Before you embark on any path, ask the question, does this path have a heart? If the answer is no, you will know it. And then you must choose another path. The trouble is, nobody asks the question, and when a man finally realizes that he has taken a path without a heart, the path is ready to kill him. At that point, very few men can stop to deliberate and leave the path. A path without a heart is never enjoyable. You have to work hard even to take it. On the other hand, a path with heart is easy. It does not make you work at liking it. I have told you that to choose a path, you must be free from fear and ambition. The desire to learn is not ambition. It is our lot as men to want to know. The path without a heart will turn against men and destroy them. It does not take much to die, and to seek death is to seek nothing. For me, there is only the traveling on the paths that have a heart, on any path that may have a heart. There I travel, and the only worthwhile challenge for me is to traverse its full length. And there I travel, looking breathlessly. You think about yourself too much, and that gives you a strange fatigue that makes you shut off the world around you and cling to your arguments. A light and amenable disposition is needed in order to withstand the impact and the strangeness of the knowledge I am teaching you. Feeling important makes one heavy, clumsy, and vain. To be a man of knowledge, one needs to be light and fluid. One has to reduce to a minimum all that is unnecessary in one's life. Once you decide something, put all your petty fears away. Your decision should vanquish them. I will tell you time and time again, the most effective way to live is as a warrior. Worry and think before you make any decision, but once you make it, be on your way free from worries or thoughts. There will be a million other decisions still awaiting you. That's the warrior's way. The warrior thinks of his death when things become unclear. The idea of death is the only thing that tempers our spirit. To be a warrior, you have to be crystal clear. My acts are sincere, but they are only the acts of an actor, because everything I do is controlled folly. Everything I do in regard to myself and my fellow men is folly, because nothing matters. Certain things in your life matter to you because they are important. Your acts are certainly important to you. But for me, not a single thing is important any longer. Neither my acts nor the acts of any of my fellow men. I go on living though, because I have my will, because I have tempered my will throughout my life until it's neat and wholesome, and now it doesn't matter to me that nothing matters. My will controls the folly of my life. Once a man learns to see, he finds himself alone in the world with nothing but folly. Your acts, as well as the acts of your fellow men in general, appear to be important to you because you have learned to think they are important. We learn to think about everything, and then we train our eyes to look as we think about the things we look at. We look at ourselves already thinking that we are important, and therefore we've got to feel important. But then, when a man learns to see, he realizes that he can no longer think about the things he looks at, and if he cannot think about what he looks at, everything becomes unimportant. Everything is equal, and therefore unimportant. We need to look with our eyes to laugh. When our eyes see, everything is so equal that nothing is funny. My laughter, as well as everything I do, is real, but it also is controlled folly, because it is useless. It changes nothing, and yet I still do it. One must always choose the path with heart in order to be at one's best. Perhaps so one can always laugh. You don't understand me now because of your habit of thinking as you look and thinking as you think. By thinking, I mean the constant idea that we have of everything in the world. Seeing dispels that habit, and until you learn to see, you will not really understand what I mean. Our lot as men is to learn. I have learned to see, and I tell you that nothing really matters. A man of knowledge lives by acting, not by thinking about acting, nor by thinking about what he will think when he is finished acting. A man of knowledge chooses a path with heart and follows it, and then he looks and rejoices and laughs, and then he sees and knows. He knows that his life will be over altogether too soon. He knows that he, as well as everybody else, is not going anywhere. He knows because he sees that nothing is more important than anything else. In other words, a man of knowledge has no honor, no dignity, no family, no name, no country, but only life to be lived. Under these circumstances, his only tie to his fellow men is his controlled folly. Thus a man of knowledge endeavors, and sweats, and puffs, and if one looks at him, he is just like any ordinary man, except that the folly of his life is under control. Nothing being more important than anything else, a man of knowledge chooses any act, and acts it out as if it matters to him. His controlled folly makes him say that what he does matters, and makes him act as if it did, and yet he knows that it doesn't. So when he fulfills his acts, he retreats in peace. And whether his acts were good or bad, or worked or didn't, is in no way part of his concern. You think about your acts, therefore you have to believe your acts are as important as you think they are, when in reality nothing of what one does is important. Nothing. But then if nothing really matters, as you ask me, how can I go on living? It would be simple to die. That's what you say and believe because you're thinking about life. Just as you're thinking now what seeing would be like. You want me to describe it to cannot tell you what it is like to see. Now you want me to describe the reasons for my controlled folly, and I can only tell you that controlled folly is very much like seeing. It is something you cannot think about. Our lot as men is to learn, and as I've said, one goes to knowledge as one goes to war, with fear, with respect, aware that one is going to war, and with absolute confidence in oneself. Put your trust in yourself. There is no emptiness in the life of a man of knowledge. Everything is filled to the brim, and everything is equal. For me, there is no victory or defeat or emptiness. Everything is filled to the brim, and everything is equal, and my struggle is worth my while. In order to become a man of knowledge, one must be a warrior. One must strive without giving up, without a complaint, without flinching, until one sees, only to realize then that nothing matters. You're too concerned with liking or with being liked yourself. A man of knowledge likes, that's all. He likes whatever or whoever he wants, but he uses his controlled folly to be unconcerned about it. My controlled folly applies only to myself and to the acts I perform while in the company of my fellow men. You must talk to the plants you're going to pick before you pick them. In order to see the plants, you must talk to them personally. You must get to know them individually. Then the plants can tell you anything you care to know about them. You fail to understand that I'm not joking. When a sorcerer attempts to see, he attempts to gain power. You think everything in the world is simple to understand, because everything you do is a routine that is simple to understand. You have to have an unbending intent in order to become a man of knowledge. A warrior takes responsibility for his acts, for the most trivial of his acts. He waits patiently, knowing that he is waiting, and knowing what he is waiting for. That is the warrior's way. What makes us unhappy is to want. Yet, if we would learn to cut our wants to nothing, the smallest thing we'd get would be a true gift. To be poor and wanting is only a thought, and so is to hate, or to be hungry, or to be in pain. They are only thoughts for me now. I have accomplished that feat. The power to do that is all we have, mind you, to oppose the forces of our lives. Without that power we are dregs, dust in the wind. It is up to us as single individuals to oppose the forces of our lives. Only a warrior can survive. A warrior knows that he is waiting and what he is waiting for, and while he waits he wants nothing, and thus whatever little thing he gets is more than he can take. If he needs to eat, he finds a way, because he is not hungry. If something hurts his body, he finds a way to stop it, because he is not in pain. To be hungry or to be in pain means that the man has abandoned himself and is no longer a warrior, and the forces of his hunger and pain will destroy him. The countless paths one traverses in one's life are all equal. Oppressors and oppressed meet at the end, and the only thing that prevails is that life was altogether too short for both. You must act like a warrior. One learns to act like a warrior by acting, not by talking. A warrior has only his will and his expectations, and with them he builds anything he wants. You have no more time for retreats or for regrets. You only have time to live like a warrior and work for patience and will. Will is something very special. It happens mysteriously. There is no real way of telling how one uses it, except that the results of using the will are astounding. Perhaps the first thing that one should do is to know that one can develop the will. A warrior knows that and proceeds to wait for it. A warrior knows that he is waiting and knows what he is waiting for. It is very difficult, if not impossible, for the average man to know what he is waiting for. A warrior, however, has no problems. He knows that he is waiting for his will. Will is something very clear and powerful which can direct our acts. Will is something a man uses, for instance, to win a battle which he, by all calculations, should lose. It is not what we call courage. Courage is something else. Men of courage are dependable men, noble men, perennially surrounded by people who flock around them and admire them. Yet very few men of courage have will. Usually they are fearless men who are given to performing daring, common-sense acts. Most of the time a courageous man is also fearsome and feared. Will, on the other hand, has to do with astonishing feats that defy our common sense. You may say that it is a kind of control. It is not what one calls willpower. Denying oneself certain things with willpower is an indulgence, and I don't recommend anything of the kind. The indulgence of denying is by far the worst. It forces us to believe we are doing great things, when in effect we are only fixed within ourselves. Will is a power, and since it is a power, it has to be controlled and tuned, and that takes time. When I was your age, I was as impulsive as you, yet I have changed. Our will operates in spite of our indulgence. For example, your will is already opening your gap little by little. There is a gap in us, like the soft spot on the head of a child which closes with age. This gap opens as one develops one's will. It's an opening that allows a space for the will to shoot out like an arrow. What a sorcerer calls will is a power within ourselves. It is not a thought or an object or a wish. An act of willpower is not will because such an act needs thinking and wishing. Will is what can make you succeed when your thoughts tell you that you're defeated. Will is a power that is the true link between men and the world. The world is whatever we perceive in any manner we may choose to perceive. Perceiving the world entails a process of apprehending whatever presents itself to us. This particular perceiving is done with our senses and with our will. Will is a relationship between ourselves and the perceived world. What the average man calls will is character and strong disposition. What a sorcerer calls will is a force that comes from within and attaches itself to the world out there. One can perceive the world with the senses as well as with the will. An average man can grab the things of the world only with his hands or his senses, but a sorcerer can grab them also with his will. I cannot really describe how it is done, but you yourself, for instance, cannot describe to me how you hear. It happens that I am also capable of hearing, so we can talk about what we hear, but not about how we hear. A sorcerer uses his will to perceive the world. That perceiving, however, is not like hearing. When we look at the world or when we hear it, we have the impression that it is out there and that it is real. When we perceive the world with our will, we know that the world is not as out there or as real as we think. Will is a force, a power. Seeing is not a force, but rather a way of getting through things. A sorcerer may have a very strong will, and yet he may not see, which means that only a man of knowledge perceives the world with his senses, and with his will, and also with his seeing. Now you know you are waiting for your will. You still don't know what it is, or how it can happen to you, so watch carefully everything you do. The very thing that could help you develop your will is amidst all the little things you do. When a man embarks on the paths of sorcery, he becomes aware in a gradual manner that ordinary life has been forever left behind, that knowledge is indeed a frightening affair, that the means of the ordinary world are no longer a buffer for him, and that he must adopt a new way of life if he's going to survive. The first thing he ought to do at that point is to want to become a warrior. The frightening nature of knowledge leaves one no alternative but to become a warrior. By the time knowledge becomes a frightening affair, the man also realizes that death is the irreplaceable partner that sits next to him on the mat. Every bit of knowledge that becomes power has death as its central force. Death lends the ultimate touch, and whatever is touched by death, indeed, becomes power. A man who follows the paths of sorcery is confronted with imminent annihilation every turn of the way, and unavoidably he becomes keenly aware of his death. Without the awareness of death, he would be only an ordinary man involved in ordinary tasks. He would lack the necessary potency, the necessary concentration that transforms one's ordinary time on earth into magical power. Thus, to be a warrior, a man has to be, first of all, and rightfully so, keenly aware of his own death. But to be concerned with death would force any one of us to focus on the self, and that would be debilitating. So the next thing one needs to be a warrior is detachment. The idea of imminent death, instead of becoming an obsession, becomes an indifference. Now you must detach yourself from everything. Only the idea of death makes a man sufficiently detached, so he is incapable of abandoning himself to anything. Only the idea of death makes a man sufficiently detached, so he can't deny himself anything. A man of that sort, however, does not crave, for he has acquired a silent lust for life, and for all things of life. He knows his death is stalking him and won't give him time to cling to anything, so he tries, without craving, all of everything. A detached man who knows he has no possibility of fencing off his death has only one thing to back himself with: the power of his decisions. He has to be, so to speak, the master of his choices. He must fully understand that his choice is his responsibility, and once he makes it, there is no longer time for regrets or recriminations. His decisions are final, simply because his death does not permit him time to cling to anything. And thus, with an awareness awareness of his death, with his detachment, and with the power of his decisions, a warrior sets his life in a strategical manner. The knowledge of his death guides him and makes him detached and silently lusty. The power of his final decisions makes him able to choose without regrets, and what he chooses is always strategically the best. And so he performs everything he has to with gusto and lusty efficiency. When a man behaves in such a manner, one may rightfully say that he is a warrior and has acquired patience. When a warrior has acquired patience, he is on his way to will. He knows how to wait. His death sits with him on his mat. They are friends. His death advises him in mysterious ways how to choose, how to live strategically, and the warrior waits. I would say that the warrior learns without any hurry, because he knows he is waiting for his will. And one day, he succeeds in performing something ordinarily quite impossible to accomplish. He may not even notice his extraordinary deed, but as he keeps on performing impossible acts, or as impossible things keep on happening to him, he becomes aware that a sort of power is emerging, a power that comes out of his body as he progresses on the path of knowledge. He notices that he can actually touch anything he wants with a feeling that comes out of his body from a spot right below or right above his navel. That feeling is the will, and when he is capable of grabbing with it, one can rightfully say that the warrior is a sorcerer and that he has acquired will. A man can go still further than that. A man can learn to see. Upon learning to see, he no longer needs to live like a warrior, nor be a sorcerer. Upon learning to see, a man becomes everything by becoming nothing. He, so to speak, vanishes, and yet he's there. I would say that this is the time when a man can be or can get anything he desires, but he desires nothing. And instead of playing with his fellow men like they were toys, he meets them in the midst of their folly. The only difference between them is that a man who sees controls his folly, while his fellow men can't. A man who sees has no longer an active interest in his fellow men. Seeing has already detached him from absolutely everything he knew before. Don't let the idea of being detached from everything you know give you the chills. The thing which should give you the chills is not to have anything to look forward to, but a lifetime of doing that which you have always done. Think of the man who plants cotton year after year until he's too old and tired to get up, so he lies around like an old dog. His thoughts and feelings, the best of him, ramble aimlessly to the only thing he has ever done, to plant cotton. For me, that is the most frightening waste there is. We are men, and our lot is to learn and to be hurled into inconceivable new worlds. Seeing is for impeccable men. Temper your spirit now. Become a warrior. Learn to see. And then you'll know there is no end to the new worlds for our vision. When you see, there are no longer familiar features of the world. Everything is new. Everything has never happened before. The world is incredible. Everything you gaze at becomes nothing. Things don't disappear. They They don't vanish. They simply become nothing, and yet they are still there. Seeing makes one realize the unimportance of everything. Seeing is learned by seeing. A warrior treats everything with respect and does not trample on anything unless he has to. He does not abandon himself to anything, not even to his death. He is not a willing partner and not available, and if he involves himself in something, you can be sure that he is aware of what he is doing. For a warrior, there is nothing out of control. Life for a warrior is an exercise in strategy. But you want to find the meaning of life. A warrior doesn't care about meanings. He would set his life strategically. Thus, if he couldn't avoid an accident, he would find means to offset his handicap, or avoid its consequences, or battle against them. He would be battling to the end. A warrior is never available. Never is he standing on the road waiting to be clobbered. Thus he cuts to a minimum his chances of the unforeseen. A warrior is never idle and never in a hurry. When a man learns to see, not a single thing he knows prevails. Not a single one. Nothing is known. Nothing remains as we used to know it when we did not see. A warrior lives strategically and never carries loads he cannot handle. Nothing is pending in the world. Nothing is finished, yet nothing is unresolved. The path of knowledge is a forced one. In order to learn, we must be spurred. In the path of knowledge, we are always fighting something, avoiding something, preparing for something. And that something is always inexplicable, greater, more powerful than us. The inexplicable forces will come to you. Later on, it'll be your own ally. So there is nothing you can do now but to prepare yourself for the struggle. The world is indeed full of frightening things, and we are helpless creatures surrounded by forces that are inexplicable and unbending. The average man in ignorance believes those forces can be explained or changed. He doesn't really know how to do that, but he expects that the actions of mankind will explain them or change them sooner or later. A sorcerer, on the other hand, does not think of explaining or changing them. Instead, he learns to use such forces by redirecting himself and adapting to their direction. That's his trick. There is very little to sorcery once you find out its trick. The sorcerer, by opening himself to knowledge, falls prey to those forces and has only one means of balancing himself, his will. Thus he must feel and act like a warrior. I will repeat this once more. Only as a warrior can one survive the path of knowledge. What helps a sorcerer live a better life is the strength of being a warrior. It is my commitment to teach you to see. I am compelled, therefore, to teach you to feel and act like a warrior. To see without first being a warrior would make you weak. It would give you a false meekness, a desire to retreat. Your body would decay because you would become indifferent. my personal commitment to make you a warrior, so you won't crumble. A warrior should be prepared only to battle. His spirit is not geared to indulging and complaining, nor is it geared to winning or losing. The spirit of a warrior is geared only to struggle, and every struggle is a warrior's last battle on earth. Thus the outcome matters very little to him. In his last battle on earth, a warrior lets his spirit flow free and clear, and as he wages his battle, knowing that his will is impeccable, a warrior laughs and laughs. A warrior selects the items that make his world. He selects deliberately, for every item he chooses is a shield that protects him from the onslaughts of the forces he is striving to use. The average man who is equally surrounded by those inexplicable forces is oblivious to them because he has other kinds of special shields to protect himself. People are busy doing that which people do. Those are their shields. Whenever a sorcerer has an encounter with any of those inexplicable and unbending forces we will talk about, his gap opens, making him more susceptible to his death than he ordinarily is. We die through that gap. Therefore, if it is open, one should have his will ready to fill it. That is, if one is a warrior. If one is not a warrior, then one has no other recourse but to use the activities of daily life to take one's mind away from the fright of the encounter, and thus to allow one's gap to close. Act like a warrior and select the items of your world. You cannot surround yourself with things helter-skelter any longer. I tell you this in a most serious vein. A warrior encounters those inexplicable and unbending forces because he is deliberately seeking them. Thus, he is always prepared for the encounter. The first thing he must do then is be prepared. A warrior takes the responsibility of protecting his life. Then, if any of those forces tap him and open his gap, he must deliberately strive to close it by himself. For that purpose, he must have a selected number of things that give him great peace and pleasure, things which he can deliberately use to take his thoughts from his fright and close his gap and make him solid. In his day-to-day life, a warrior chooses to follow the path with heart. It is the consistent choice of the path with heart which makes a warrior different from the average man. He knows that a path has heart when he is one with it, when he experiences a great peace and pleasure traversing its length. The things a warrior selects to make his shields are the items of a path with heart. You must surround yourself with the items of a path with heart, and you must refuse the rest. You must stop talking to yourself. Every one of us does that. We carry on an internal talk. We talk about our world. In fact, we maintain our world with our internal talk. Whenever we finish talking to ourselves, the world is always as it should be. We renew it. We kindle it with life. We uphold it with our internal talk. Not only that, but we also choose our paths as we talk to ourselves. Thus we repeat the same choices over and over until the day we die, because we keep on repeating the same internal talk over and over until the day we die. A warrior is aware of this and strives to stop talking. This is the last point you have to know if you want to live like a warrior. First of all, you must use your ears to take some of the burden from your eyes. We have been using our eyes to judge the world since the time we were born. We talk to ourselves and to others mainly about what we see. A warrior is aware of that and listens to the world. He listens to the sounds of the world. He is aware that the world will change as soon as he stops talking to himself, and he must be prepared for that monumental jolt. The world is such and so only because we tell ourselves that that is the way it is. If we stop telling ourselves that the world is so and so, the world will stop being so and so. You must start slowly to undo the world. Your problem is that you confuse the world with what people do. The things people do are the shields against the forces that surround us. What we do as people gives us comfort and makes us feel safe. What people do is rightfully very important, but only as a shield. We never learn that the things we do as people are only shields, and we let them dominate and topple our lives. In fact, I could say that for mankind, what people do is greater and more important than the world itself. The world is all that is encased here: life, death, people, the allies, and everything else that surrounds us. The world is incomprehensible. We won't ever understand it. We won't ever unravel its secrets. Thus, we must treat it as it is, a sheer mystery. The average man doesn't do this, though. The world is never a mystery for him, and when he arrives at old age, he is convinced he has nothing more to live for. An old man has not exhausted the world, he has exhausted only what people do. But in his stupid confusion, he believes that the world has no more mysteries for him. What a wretched price to pay for our shields. A warrior is aware of this confusion and learns to treat things properly. The things that people do cannot under any conditions be more important than the world, and thus a warrior treats the world as an endless mystery and what people do as an endless folly. Focus all your attention on listening to sounds and do your best to find the holes between the sounds. Stay in complete alertness. Everything is meaningful for a sorcerer. The sounds have holes in them, and so does everything around you. Ordinarily, a man does not have the speed to catch the holes, and thus he goes through life without protection. The worms, the birds, the trees, all of them can tell us unimaginable things if only one could have the speed to grasp their message. Fright is something one can never get over. A warrior cannot indulge, thus he cannot die of fright. Your difficulty is that you want to understand everything, and that is not possible. If you insist on understanding, you're not considering your entire lot as a human being. Your stumbling block is intact. Understanding is only a very small affair, so very small. Yet sober understanding is vital. Only by acting can one become a sorcerer. You now have the need to live like a warrior. There is no need for us to say anything about others. There is no need for you or for me to regard others' actions in our thoughts one way or another. The worst thing we can do is to force people to agree with us. I mean that we shouldn't try to impose our will when people don't behave the way we want them to. The worst thing one can do is to confront human beings bluntly. A warrior proceeds strategically. If one wants to stop our fellow men, one must always be outside the circle that presses them. That way one can always direct the pressure.